Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Truth Seeker Atheist here. I've been watching a couple of videos lately. I'm going to try and center this a little bit. There we go. And hey, I make no pretense of making spectacular videos. I'm not talented that way. I don't have the time to do so. But thoughts, ideas don't require productions. In fact, that's kind of what makes the old movies before they could make explosions and CG effects to do inhuman and impossible things. Made the old movies so much more interesting because there was a plot, there was a story, there was acting. There was a story told, and you had to follow the story, and that's why my wife and I like TCM so much, because of that's the difference between many of the older movies and the newer ones. Not that there aren't good new movies. I love the Jedi movies, the Star Wars. I think they're great. I was of the generation that saw the first Star Wars. I think in 1977, I was 22. I saw that in the big screen, nobody saw graphics like that ever, it was just phenomenal. And, now to think that so many of those people in my generation have passed away, especially in the last year. My wife and I were just watching a documentary about Gary Shandling and his influence on comedy, and a documentary made about it. And he had a heart attack 6 months before I did. I just think about what the doctor told me, that I was very, very lucky to be alive. He mentioned that at least 3 times. 3 times in the operating room and once in my recovery room. And I didn't realize that I was that close to dying, but I guess we're all, anybody, it can happen anytime, any day, any minute. We don't know when our time is up, but it does give you a little different perspective in life and how precious life is, and that it's time to enjoy life and the freedom that we have. The understanding that we've gotten in the last 400 years certainly negates a 4,000-year book. When did the Bible first begin to be written? Maybe 3,000 years ago. The science, it just doesn't stack up to what we understand today. We should just face the facts, and it is a wonderful thing just to be here, just to enjoy life. It's Easter Sunday. We're not celebrating the death of, or the rising of our Lord from his death. There's still no evidence of his having ever done that. But anyway, we did have an Easter egg hunt for our grandson, and that just to see the joy of a little boy who's almost 3 years old, finding the brightly colored Easter eggs out in the yard. They're not really hidden. And oh, I found one. And to see the excitement of him with a basket picking up these brightly colored Easter eggs, it just brings joy to my heart. Although, at 60, I'll be 63 in a couple of weeks, has been tempered quite a bit, especially of late, with my physical problems. It makes me realize how quickly things can change for you, especially physically, and especially at this age. So I try to keep a positive mental attitude, which is a little difficult sometimes to keep a positive attitude and hope for the best. I mean, I just went through surgery, and I hope that it would improve my back. Actually, I feel worse now than I did before the surgery. But that's not surprising. That's often the case. Maybe God is sending retribution against me for being a non-believer. But I do comment on other people's videos, and sometimes I get weird responses back, and recently I got one back where I got a long lecture. Usually I'm the one with the long lectures, and sometimes I realize I'm making a lecture and people don't like it, so I'll delete it. Maybe I shouldn't, I don't know. I mean, who should stop me from what I'm going to say anyway? I mean, I have freedom of speech. People like it, they like it. If people don't, they don't. That's their tough luck. I try to be positive as much as I can. Sometimes I'm a little sarcastic, but you know what? Sometimes I'm, just human. So. But anyway, there's been a lot of videos lately about the memorial. Telltale Atheist made one recently, and Living Truth channel. There was one on the memorial, and I made one on the memorial. And I got to thinking about it, and it's been a long time since I celebrated the memorial, and I know it's a day late. If I'm a Jehovah's Witness, I'm a day late. If I'm a Bible student, it was last Thursday, but I think I'm going to celebrate, and I thought about that, and I got the only thing I had orange juice, but that doesn't cut it, because the Bible says it was fruit of the vine, and the best I got right now are grapes. So here we go. I'm celebrating my memorial now. There's juice in this, I mean, yeah, there's a little pulpy material in it, and the fiber's good for you. So that's my grape. And, we're supposed to celebrate with unleavened bread. And, unleavened bread, matzahs, they're very crunchy. And, the very closest thing I could, I had leavened bread. I don't eat bread. I haven't had any toast now for about a month. I've been really trying to eat healthily, according to the doctor. I am trying. It's difficult because I'm largely immobile. My knees are very sore. My back is very bad in pain. But I've been trying to eat very healthily. That's why I have the grapes, for one thing. Grapes are good for you, antioxidants and all that. But the closest thing to unleavened bread I had was, unleavened bread is matzah, very, very crunchy, crispy, but it's sort of like eating cardboard, I don't know why anybody'd want to eat as a food stuff, but I can understand it from maybe some sort of a symbolic nature. And the closest I had was Captain Crunch. And since we always served on a platter, I got a nice paper plate here to serve myself my unleavened. Well, this is leavened, I would assume. It's puffy, but that's something that I couldn't understand. Because the leavened bread. The idea was the leavening was yeast that was added to the dough, and it creates pockets of carbon dioxide when the yeast metabolizes the sugars and the starches in the bread, in the flour. It makes carbon dioxide. It gives off carbon dioxide gas, which make little pockets of carbon dioxide. And that's where your bread gets puffy, nice and fluffy bread if you do it right and you let the yeast live. But when you bake it, you kill the yeast. There's no more yeast in it. It's pure. That's the thing I just can't understand. Why the flattened bread versus the puffy bread, there's nothing the same. I mean, nothing different about it from a chemical point of view, because the yeast is gone. The yeast is dead. I mean, if the yeast was still alive in your bread, when you bought it in the store, it would go bad awfully fast, and you wouldn't be able to eat it. But since this stuff is crunchy, it gives me sort of the memory of when I did partake of the memorial, except this is much better because it's got sugar on it, sweetener, which I shouldn't be eating. The Captain Crunch we get is for my grandson. But one of the points that Telltale mentioned about the he quit being a Jehovah's Witness at the age of 18. They threw him out and disfellowshipped him at the age of 18. So he had a long time out of the. He never really. I mean, he got 18 years of indoctrination, but that's not the same as being in the religion. 50 years. I mean, I had the scriptures pounded into my head inside and out. All of the studies in the scriptures. I don't know how many times we went through the divine plan of the ages in our studies in the New York Bible Students Ecclesia. We would always have a talk, a discourse from an elder, and then we would have a study from one of the studies in the scriptures, and often it was the first volume, the Divine Plan of the Ages, because we thought if anybody new came in, at least it would give them the beginner's course in the truth. So that I don't know how many times we read the Divine Plan of the Ages, and you know what? Still, I couldn't tell you how it reads, because although I have many of the scriptures memorized, I have places. I have the scriptures, the Bible, sort of photo documented inside my brain, and if I can't quote a scripture, I know where exactly to find it, and scenarios, and so I mean, I can go to the Bible and find it if I want, but when it comes to Russell's writings, he was all over the place. There are parts of his writings in the Divine Plan of the Ages where one sentence was 3 pages long, literally. I'm not joking. And there'd be so many commas, so many interjected thoughts that it was literally impossible to decipher what was being said in that sentence. And I tried and tried and tried and tried, and a lot of it just did not make sense. A lot of the truth was told to me as a kid, mainly by my mother. My father didn't take much time with us boys, although I would hear his talks because as a pilgrim speaker, he often served Bible student ecclesias up and down the East Coast. I know I've mentioned this a number of times in my videos, that from all of New England, south of Boston, all the way to almost Washington, D.C., the Dawn Bible students sent pilgrim speakers out, through Pennsylvania. I recalled one time counting about between 20, 25 Bible student ecclesias, most of them clustered around the greater New York City metropolitan area. At least within an hour's drive, but a good number of them were in Baltimore. There was one in York, Pennsylvania, and it would take us hours, and this was before the interstates were completed. And so often we took back roads. This is back in the 1960s and early 70s. And my father would take me rather than try to get the whole family corralled together and take us on these 5-hour treks where we would have to sit quietly and listen to him put his talk together. That's usually what my father did on these rides, and so I got to be the guinea pig. Often to listen to his talks. And so if it was a 2-hour ride, I got to hear his talk over and over and over and over again until he had it the way he wanted it. And then we'd get there, and then I'd have to hear it again, and then I'd hear his critique of his talk on the way home. So I heard an awful lot of the truth from his perspective in these car rides. Outside of that, he didn't take time to study with us boys. My mother, when we would grow up at home, she'd be the one that would tell us most of the beliefs and most of the odd things, like the JWs didn't have the monopoly on strange ideas. They inherited this legacy of weirdness from. When I say weirdness, I'm talking about the idea of Smurfs, the idea of demons being everywhere. I mean, I remember my mother telling me that if you saw out of the corner of your eye a shadow moving, those were fallen angels or demons that were lurking about, ready to take over your mind. And I got paranoid of the dark, as a 4 or 5 year old kid, hearing these things that my mother would be pumping into me, and this is. I mean, she didn't have the wherewithal to be able to differentiate between what seemed sound, and what wasn't sound. I mean, to give you an idea, my brothers and my grandparents, my grandfather was a banker. He was a New York banker, and I'll show you something. I'm sorry, but I'll be right back because I have to show you some proof. Now, I got some my grandparents, my grandfather and I had a very close relationship as I was growing up. But my grandfather, he was a high-powered New York banker. And this was his desk plaque for his office. There we go. We're centered in that was my grandfather. And that's a German name. That's the German spelling for waterman. The FS, Felix Southard Wassman. And Felix was his first name. Southard was his mother's last name, maiden name. They did that a lot back in those days. Back in the turn of the century, family names were passed on as middle names often. And my grandfather's boss, immediate supervisor, was this fellow right here, William Howard Taft II. Now, if anybody knows anything about U.S. history, William Howard Taft was a president around the turn of the century, 1902 or so, sometime around there. About the same time as Theodore Roosevelt. In fact, my grandfather knew the Roosevelts. They were all blue blood New York banking families, the Roosevelts and the Tafts and so on. Back then, the sort of the aristocracy of the you had the Vanderbilts and you had all of these. They were all centered, the Fricks, they were all centered around New York City, and many of the children of the famous money makers ended up in the banking business, like Cornelius Vanderbilt's son, I think William. He was more of a banker than he was anything else. My grandfather knew these people, and I won't go through his story, but it's kind of an interesting thing. He worked his way up from a 2-week Christmas job during the Depression, 2 weeks to hand out calendars for the Bank for Savings, which was the second or the oldest bank in New York City. It was one of the very first banks in the U.S. history. And so my grandfather got a 2-week job there. And my great-grandfather had worked in the accounting department as a bookkeeper. And since he didn't need the job as much as my grandfather needed a job, again, this is back in the early 1930s, in the Depression, he talked to the bank, his bank managers, and he basically said, I will quit, and if you take my son into the bank. And that's how my grandfather broke into banking. And apparently he did quite well. He rose to the position of vice president of investment. So my grandfather flew back in the 1940s and 50s. He flew and to projects all over the country, dams and things like that were federally funded. The Delaware Memorial Bridges were funded by in part by my grandfather's bank. My grandfather was critical in making the loans for that, and he did quite well. As you can see, his boss was William Howard Taft II, who was actually the nephew of the President of the United States. And so anyway, back in those days, you could do a lot. And I actually kind of got lost a little bit about what I was gonna say, because I got caught up in telling his story. But I don't know. My grandfather, he gave in to my grandmother. He wasn't a Bible student, actually. He was born a Presbyterian. My grandmother was born into the Bible students, and she convinced him by leaving literature all over the house to join the Bible students. And so this was around the 1930s, and finally he listened to a discourse from Norman Woodworth, and Norman Woodworth, who happened to be the first cousin of Clayton Woodworth, who was a senior person, a director, one of the directors that went to jail in 1918. For the seventh volume, the controversy over the seventh volume and the litigation, the violation of the Espionage Act. And so, but yeah, anyway, my grandfather, he got, because of my grandmother, he got snookered in, and he was baptized in 1938. As well as my grandmother, and she became Norman Woodworth's secretary for 25 years. Oh, I know where I was telling what story. My grandfather, and he retired from the bank in 1964, and they moved to Florida. And I was telling you a story about my mother and the shadows and the weirdness, and how the JWs come by the demon thing honestly, because this is really a legacy of the Bible students. They believed in these things, that these demons, that they were cast out of heaven in 1914, and that they permeated the atmosphere around us, and that we couldn't see them, and that Jesus was here, and that he was establishing his kingdom. And in fact, actually, that became a big controversy between the Bible students, within the Bible students, and caused a split in the mid-1960s, because many Bible students began to think that, hey, maybe this isn't the 1,000-year kingdom. Many of the diehards, they broke away from the Dawn in 1965. There was a booklet printed that said maybe we were anticipating too much about 1914, and many of the diehard Bible students, real strong diehard Russellites, they broke away from the Dawn. And they continued on. The issue was whether or not we were in the 1,000-year kingdom, and there was no real evidence, according to the Dawn, that we were actually in the 1,000 years. And the diehards, they stayed with the second volume chronology, and that all the complexities and all the crazy chronology that was adhered to by Russell in the late 19th century, early 20th century. But my grandfather retired from the bank and did very well for himself. Sufficiently well for him to live in. He and my grandmother lived very comfortable lives in Saddle River, and then they sold their home and moved down to Florida, as many retirees do. And they moved to Clearwater Beach, which, strangely enough, became the headquarters of the Sea Org of the all of these coincidences. the Sea Org of the the crazy Scientology business. But anyway, back in the 1960s, I don't know when the Scientology actually came to Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater area, but they oh dear, here we go. I'm sorry. I like to be able to see myself. I don't know why it does that, but you see, I'm not great with technology. So anyway, we went down in 1964 to. They had moved into a very nice home that was made on one of these man-made islands, and my grandfather. He made things nice for us boys. He was a very caring person. He was very warm, and I had a very, very good and close relationship with my grandfather. But he was a Bible student. He believed in what my grandmother. She was the one that really did it, and he did it for her. Really, when later on in life, when she lost it mentally, Alzheimer's, he stopped going to the meetings. But he was a trustee of the Dawn. He was Woodworth's best friend for many years. He was was not only a trustee for the Dawn, he was also an officer. He was the treasurer for a while. And he had been associated with the Dawn for a good 50 plus years. So, well, one year while we were visiting, it was in 1964, and we came down around Christmas time to visit my grandparents, and we went to Clearwater Beach. And my grandfather had bought us these little inflatable things that looked like motorboats when you inflated them. The rings you put around your waist. And the beach was crowded. It must have been a weekend. It was warm. And the water was warm. And you know what? Actually, it must have been around Easter time, because I don't think we would have gone swimming around Christmas. We did go at Christmas once or twice, but I think this incident was sometime around Easter in late March, early April. And my middle brother, got lost. We were all in the water together, and the Gulf Coast is not really a raging. It's not like the ocean. With big waves, it's a lot more calm, but there are currents, and there are strong currents, and my brother must have been taken down the beach from one of these rip currents, and my mother went into a panic because they lost my brother, and then, as she was panicking and going up the wrong way up the beach looking for him, he came walking back, and he came back, and there he was at the blanket, and she honestly thought an angel brought him back. There he was, suddenly back. And she really did honestly think that it was her idea that an angel had delivered my brother back to her, that it was miraculous, that he had reconstituted, so I don't know, materialized, beamed back, like Star Trek, and so it was and she told the story to my grandfather, and I don't know what he thought, but he didn't tell her she was crazy. And she told that story for the rest of her life. And Bible students bought into it. And You heard similar stories from other Bible students when they testify. They would. We had these meetings called testimony meetings, and people would give their experiences. It gave the laity who were not elders or deacons the opportunity to be able to speak out in front of the general public and say what's on their mind. And sometimes it got a little crazy. I mean, one time we had a sister who had come from the Pentecostal church. She and her husband had been Pentecostal preachers, both of them, and they had been converted to the truth back in the 1940s sometime, and they were regular Bible student, well-known Bible student members. To be quite honest, the Bible students were largely a white group. Even when I was a kid, I'd say our class, our ecclesia in New York City was 95% white, if not even more. And this was true throughout the United States. There were, there was some racial mixture, especially as the 80s and the 90s came, but increasingly so. But it's still if you go to the internet and you go to you look up General Convention 2000, anything recent like 2016, 2017, they have the General Convention photograph, which they take every year. It's a Bible student tradition to have conventions photographed. In fact, if you go to the Watchtower headquarters, they have one of the early, might be, I think, 1896 or sometime around there. They make it as a mural around their museum wall at the Watchtower headquarters of the Bible Student Convention. It's a huge blow-up of one of the early Bible Student Conventions. And so it's been a Bible student tradition to have convention photographs. And the Bible students continue that tradition every year. And the ideas of being possessed, being watching out for the occult. In fact, there is a controversial, and it was controversial during Russell's day, the vow. Now, it's interesting. If anybody, and I don't hear much about this on the internet, on JW activism, but the vow was something that Russell put together for the Bethel family and extended it to the Bible students as a whole. Now, the vow was something, and it's still controversial amongst Bible students, whether or not it should be read at the beginning of a convention or not. And so there's a kind of a tense compromise as to leaving it up to the leaders, the chairman, Bible Student Convention chairman's discretion as to whether or not the vow should be read at the beginning of a convention. But the vow is an interesting part of Bible student history, and one that you don't hear much of. The vow, geez, I'm a terrible person. I wish I had it now, because I'm just speaking off the cuff right now. I didn't really have much in the way planned, but the earliest thought, my desire shall be, what shall I render unto the Lord for sacrifice unto thee? And it goes into sex and to the occult. The Bible students vow. Sorry, guys. I could be vow unto the Lord. Okay. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Okay. Here we go. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May thy rule come into my heart more and more, and thy will be done in my mortal body, relying on the assistance of thy promised grace to help in every time of need. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, I register this vow. Daily I will remember at the throne of heavenly grace the general interests of the harvest work, and particularly the share which I myself am privileged to enjoy in that work, and the dear co-laborers everywhere. Boy, this is Bible studentese. I vow to still more carefully, if possible, scrutinize my thoughts, my words, and doings, to the intent that I may be better enabled to serve thee and thy dear flock. I vow to thee that I will be on alert to resist everything akin to spiritism and occultism, and remembering that therefore there are but two masters, I shall resist the snares in all reasonable ways as being of the adversary. I further vow that, with the exceptions below, I will at all times and all places conduct myself toward those of the opposite sex in private exactly as I would do with them in public, in presence of the congregation of the Lord's people. And so far as reasonably possible, I will avoid being in the same room with anyone of the opposite sex alone, unless the door to the room stand wide open. And you want to talk about sexual repression, and this is what we Bible student kids had to grow up with this idea in mind that it was wrong to even be in the same room with a person of the opposite sex, unless, here are the exceptions. Exceptions in the case of brethren, wife, children, mother, and natural sisters. In the case of sisters, husband, children, father, and natural brothers. Okay, so I guess they're leaving incest out. But anyway, the vow was always a controversial part because the Bethel Brethren had to take the vow. And I guess they sort of have to do something similar today. So things haven't changed too terribly much. I guess the Pillow Talk videos are evidence of that. Now, the vow was something that was extended, though, beyond the Bethel Brethren. And in the Watchtower, there were articles written that there was a register of brethren who took the vow. Their names were on a register. And they indicated at the time that there were at least 5,000 individuals who had officially taken the vow and registered with the Watchtower as having taken the vow. And Russell urged, more than urged, really kind of bullied Bible students into taking it. In fact, elders lost their eldership if they didn't take the vow. And it was one of those deals where well, what do you have wrong with it? Are you hiding something if you don't take the? Why shouldn't you take the vow? And so this is one of those deals. I mean, the Watchtower was already, before Rutherford got into people's lives. They were nitpicking into people's lives and trying to control. And there are, you can look back into some of these early Watchtower articles that were written about the vow. And it created a big stir amongst Bible students back then, and it continued among the more orthodox Bible students, continue to cause a problem for the Bible students today. So for Bible students, it is still an issue. This idea that JWs believe in demons and that things are being possessed and that the devil and his demons, his fallen angels, as we called them, as Bible students called them, were going around looking to disrupt the work of the truth, and you had to be careful, and you had to keep close to the brethren and stay away from the world. Using those scare tactics, where it was something that was not something new. I mean, the JWs came by it honestly because it carried down from the Bible students. The Bible students were, in fact, the original. I mean, and even so, I mean, they still exist today. I got a comment recently on one of my comments that questioned whether or not I was indeed a Bible student. Yes, I was born and raised in the Bible students. They carried on. The legacy carried on. There was a continuity. Yeah, there was a split. And the split occurred in the late 1920s and early 30s, up until the late 30s. In fact, I know many of the names that, recently I was very surprised to see that in 1919, one of my subscribers, Unreluctant, made a comment. And I enjoy his interaction. And he sent me some links to some early Bible student literature. I had time to only go through a little bit of it. Much of it is our old volumes, links to the volumes, 6 volumes that Russell wrote, and a lot of old Bible student literature. Russell wrote a lot of stuff. He was if anything, a prolific writer. Not that it necessarily made any sense, but he became a very prolific writer, almost exclusively the only writer for the Watchtower until he died. And then it became Rutherford. But there was a continuity in the Bible students movement. Many Bible students broke ties with the Watchtower from 1917 onwards. And I saw in one of these links, it was really surprising to me that in one of these links from that were provided by Unreluctant, they had a vote, and while the board of directors were still in jail in the Atlanta penitentiary, serving out 4 20-year sentences. The sentences were concurrent. They had 80 years altogether, but they were 20-year sentences being served concurrently for 6 of the 7. DeCecca, the one, got 10 years, I think. He got a reduced sentence. I don't know why. I guess the judge deemed he wasn't as much of a conspirator in the espionage as the rest of the board of directors was. But it was interesting that they held there was they moved the headquarters back to Allegheny during that period of time in 1919, 1918, 1919. Certain Bible students took over roles that were vacated by the board of directors, functionally with the idea of being temporary servants to keep the activity going. But it did severely hamper the work of the Watchtower. I think they had ample articles that were written by Russell, and they reprinted many of these articles, or had a stash of articles that Russell had written in advance, because he had thought that his health would not hold out and that he was going to pass away soon. So he had some material written in advance to put into the Watchtower. But they held their annual meeting. And in January, I think it was the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, sometime around there, was the annual meeting when they elected the officers for the Watchtower. And it was held concurrently as a convention. And this particular year was 1919, January. It had just turned 1919. The directors were still in jail, and they were reelected to their posts. Rutherford was reelected to the post of president. Van Amberg was treasurer. I forget. I think Wise was the vice president. C.W. Wise, I think his name was. But it was interesting for me to see because there were other names nominated, and one of them was George Kendall, G. Kendall. Now, George Kendall was a Bible student who stayed with the Bible students after the split. He broke ties with the Watchtower in 1928, along with Norman Woodworth, and probably 75% of the Bible students by 1928 had broken ties with the Watchtower, and the very first action was for a number of these to get together and hold a convention in the old Bible house in Allegheny. In 1929, there was what they called the Bible Student Reunion Convention, which actually became a recurring convention that eventually evolved into becoming the General Bible Students General Convention. And the reunion convention was held in the Bible House. I understand there were about 300 in attendance, which was pretty good for that period, especially since that was when the stock market had fallen, and all hell broke loose in 1929. But economically, they held a convention. Norman Woodworth was one of the key organizers, along with Brother Wilson. I knew him. He was one of my grandfather's best friends. Edward Fay, another one of my grandfather's best friends. And a number of other key brethren, including Kendall, who was a key Bible student in association with the Dawn, and Pollock, George Pollock, G.R. Pollock, Russell Pollock, we called him. Russell was his middle name, but he liked to be called Russell Pollock. He was named after Charles Russell, so he was jailed in 1918 as a young man for holding on to a conscientious objection position. And since there was no provision in U.S. law for conscientious objection. Anyone who was a conscientious objector went to jail. And so he went to jail. Many young Bible student men went to jail who were being drafted into the army to fight in World War I. And so as children, when I was growing up, we used to have what we called CO meetings, or conscientious objector meetings, and we would register on a legal document. And Russell Pollock would give us talks about his experience in jail as a young man, and his position as a conscientious objector in 1918 as a Bible student. And he was, you could see these guys if you want. The Dawn Bible Students has a website. And on that website are the Frank and Ernest and Bible Answers. Actually, the Bible Answers was the television program that the Dawn sponsored, and Frank and Ernest was the radio program. And the main purpose of Frank and Ernest was to regather many of the disenfranchised Bible students and unhappy JWs to bring them back into contact with the Bible students. And they were quite successful. By the mid-1940s, about 50, Norman Woodworth estimated in Superior Court, he was asked by a Superior Court judge in a tax dispute to describe the Bible students movement, and he indicated that at that time, which was 1946, that there were 56,000 Bible students. And that makes sense because some of the, if you go on to JW Facts, you could see that back in the mid-1920s, that in anticipation of the 1925 end of the world predictions, that the growth of the Bible students movement was pretty spectacular. It went from about 17,000 in 1917 to about 90,000 in 1925, and then dropped down to 17,000 again in 1928 and 29. And these memorial figures, again, as I mentioned in the past, there was no earthly call. There was no Jonadab class. Everybody got a resurrection. The only call was to be consecrated to the high calling. That was the message that Russell gave. That if you were a Bible student, you were anointed. And if you were baptized, you were considered anointed. Today, you're baptized, you're not considered anointed. But back in the 1920s and earlier, if you were baptized to be part of the anointed class. So there was a change in the meaning of baptism after the Jehovah's Witnesses created this idea. Rutherford created this idea, the Jonadab class. So all of those individuals who attended Memorial, the majority of them were more Memorial partakers. And that was the way it was when I was a kid, that the majority of those who were in the ecclesia were consecrated, baptized, and consecrated to the high calling, which was to the anointed class, and they would partake of the memorial. And they used matzah. They used the more orthodox group used wine. Many Bible students were really anti-alcohol, so they used fruit of the vine, which was just grape juice. And I know that the Jehovah's Witnesses make a big deal about sticking to wine, and that that's because Jesus took it and all that. But I think that the Bible students justified it by saying that it was the fruit of the vine. It didn't talk anything about having to be fermented, which actually is kind of strange because to think about it, they make a big deal about the bread being unleavened, but the wine has to be part of it. Now, wine is fermented with yeast, and it has active yeast in it. And nothing there to kill the yeast in true wine. And in bread, when you leaven the bread, you actually kill the yeast in the oven. But it's ironic, and this is all part of the idiosyncrasies and the sort of convoluted, conflicting, convoluted thinking that you had to have unleavened bread. You couldn't have leavened bread, but you have to have wine. And the wine has the yeast, and the unleavened bread doesn't. And so. And then the Bible students use grape juice, which has no yeast, at least not enough to make any difference. And so, I don't know. You see how silly the whole business is? See, it just is silly. But when it becomes impressed upon you, and it is, you're made to believe that this is the truth and that life depends on this, that your life and the life of the world depends on all of this. It's sad. It's sad. One of the things, I was going to make notes of some of the things I was going to say. René Descartes, we call it, what is that? We call it it's part of probability theory, and I'm having a slip. But the basic idea of it is that, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose by being religious or believe in God? Because if you're wrong, then you spend an eternity in hell. But if you're right, you spend an eternity in heavenly bliss. And really, there's no skin off your back. What do you have to lose in being a believer? So why not be a believer? Because you have all to gain and nothing to lose. But if you are not a believer, you have everything to lose and eternal torment. That was Descartes. Oh God, why do I have that? Why do I have that block? I'm really sorry, guys. I had that Pascal's. He was. I'm getting René Descartes mixed up with Pascal's wager, and I didn't even get it. See, I didn't even. I remembered it. It's still there. This 63-year-old brain can pull it out of the muck. Yeah, I'm a little lively today. I had my grandson over here, and he really picked up my spirits. But Pascal's wager, I think today we have more evidence than ever that we have a hell of a lot more to lose if we have to live our lives like Jehovah's Witnesses and live in the prison house of do's and don'ts of religion. I mean, religion and there are a lot of things that you have to do in religion, period. I mean, it doesn't matter what religion it is. You can't just, be spiritual on your own. I mean, no church is going to advocate, go ahead, be spiritual on your own, believe whatever you want to believe. That's why they're there. That's why the Catholics exist. That's why they're Baptists. That's why we have all these different sects, because they're all right. We're the ones with the truth. And some of them, like the Mormons, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, like the Scientologists, like many infringe upon your freedom, your life. And so what do you have to lose in Pascal's wager? You have to lose everything if you devote your life to the Watchtower governing body. You have everything to lose, because all we know is that we got this life, this one chance to be happy on this earth. And certainly to live the life that they impose on you is not a happy life, because they require sacrifice, they require pain, they require persecution for you to be one of them. And they insist upon it. And so you're living your life by giving up everything to them, and you're losing everything. You're losing the chance to be happy and to enjoy life. And as far as we know, we only have that one chance. So whenever anybody wants to talk about Pascal's wager, today Pascal's wager is definitely the reverse. You have everything to lose being a Jehovah's Witness. You have everything to lose. And I'm glad that I didn't spend my entire life chained to the Bible student's religion. And I don't care what anybody says. You know, Telltale Atheist said it the other day in his 5-minute sketch or 10-minute sketch of the 200-year history of the Bible students and Jehovah's Witness movements. Said that the Bible students are scarily like the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I don't think he even knows how true that statement is. I've lived the Bible student life growing up in it, and what I hear from Jehovah's Witnesses, it's not that different from what I grew up with, and nobody can tell me otherwise, because I experienced it. You know, there are people who just don't understand. Okay, there are certain things that maybe Bible students on appearance are less stringent about. Let's say education. But it's not true, because Bible students still worry, still educate their children to be careful about college, only to be pragmatic about what subjects to take. Don't take science. Don't take anything like that. Take a business curriculum. Take history. But don't take philosophy. Don't take mathematics. Don't take science, because you'll be an atheist or you'll be an evolutionist or both. And what I'm saying is absolutely the truth. That's what we got, and we got it pounded into us over and over again. And we were taught that as the day drew near, that Bible students, they called it the dark day in which no man could work. We were expecting a tremendous persecution to come down upon the truth upon the brethren. There's so much that is so similar, because the Jehovah's Witnesses derived from the Bible students. Many of the beliefs are the same, packaged up a little differently and applied somewhat differently, and certainly with their new Bible worded differently. But I think if the Bible students had a crack at rewording the Bible, they'd probably make something up very close to the New World Translation. I'm not kidding. So anyway, I mean, let's put it this way. The way I look at it is this way. If the Bible student, this is the Bible students. If you were given the opportunity to light your house with warm, yellowish, incandescent lighting that simulated the sun, and fluorescent lighting, they choose fluorescent lighting. Okay? That's the Bible students. Okay? And in reality, that was the Bible students. You can't believe how many Bible student homes I grew up in. I was growing up in, and their friends, their houses were lit with fluorescent tubes. And sort of a stark industrial setting. I said enough. I've gone on an hour and 10 rant. I'm sorry. But happy Easter, everybody. Enjoy the chocolate Easter eggs, the pagan practice of chocolate Easter eggs. And my daughter called it the eggs that the jackalopes lay. And right now I'm watching an eagle do lazy circles in the beautiful blue sky above my house. Yeah, we have eagles. They nest not nest, but they stop and rest in my trees in my yard, and they're quite a sight to see. We do have a beautiful earth, and we don't know how much time. None of us know how much time we got. And let's make the best of it. Let's live in this world. You want to talk about a spiritual life? It's trying to get the most out of what we know and what we have. And I'll just continue to make these. I mean, maybe next time we'll talk about Fibonacci numbers. Telltale Atheist was talking to somebody, and they mentioned Fibonacci numbers. And maybe I'll talk about you see, that's one of my passions is mathematics. And this universe, this world is mathematics. Everything fundamentally is described in a mathematical way. So anyway, I wish you a happy Easter, and to everybody, have a good day.